All right. We are now unmuted. And here we are, gentlemen.
Yay.
You're going out live to the stream now. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. All right. This is going to be a good show. This whole talent topic has been coming up. I've done, I think, man, this week I've done I want to say 8 to 10 interviews this week, 5 of them today. And one of the topics that keeps coming up is mediocrity and lack of talent and the crutches that some people are using to mask that lack of talent. And how do you get talent? And is it innate? Is it genetic? Is it nature versus nurture? So we're going to talk about all that stuff. As you guys know, you have the notes. So we've got a ton of people showing up in the chat so far. I see Stephen Scharf in there. Thanks for coming, Stephen Scharf. Janet Robinson's in there. Chris Berry is our TWiP community manager. He's in there holding it down. I think he's over on Twitch. I'm not sure. I see Hawk is in there. Ginger
I'm in.
Bearding. Yeah, you're everywhere. How are you in there and here? How is that even possible?
I don't know.
All right, guys. You ready to start this thing?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. So as you folks know that are watching, as you may know, this is This Week in Photo. I believe this is episode 569, and what you're watching now is basically a live performance of This Week in Photo. And this what you see here will ultimately be edited. At least the audio will be edited, and that will become the podcast for This Week in Photo. So you're getting a chance to see how our sausage is made. And all the mistakes and all that stuff that gets edited out. you get to suffer through that. So, all right, here we go. We're going to start the show in just a second. Here we go. In this episode of TWiP, it's all about talent. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today, we're going to be talking about nature versus nurture when it comes to talent and photography. In other words, if you don't know how to be a photographer, is it possible to become a good photographer by, doing that whole 10,000 hours thing? Or are you just screwed because you weren't born with the innate talent of understanding composition, shutter speed, and all that stuff? So here to tackle that with me are two of my friends. The first one here is Mr. Troy Miller, who's always on TWiP with our critiques. Troy could not be on this show because he has an opinion on this, right? So
I only have an opinion on a few things, and this is one of them.
This is one of them. But you're on. I'm glad to have you here. Also on the show is Mr. Thomas Hawk.
Hey, Frederick.
What's going on, man? You and I have not talked in forever. What is going on?
Good to see you.
You get younger and younger every time I see you. It's not even fair.
So that's nice of you to say.
It's not fair. But there's a couple things I wanted to talk about with you, man. You are you were kind of waving the flag for Flickr for the longest way back in the day and built up a giant audience and kind of holding their feet to the fire, in terms of the things that they were doing and weren't doing, which kind of goes to your honesty and sort of pragmatism about the service. And now they got acquired by SmugMug. Yeah. You have some thoughts on that too. Yeah. Obviously you hate them now. So,
so
no, he doesn't. He's got a SmugMug t-shirt on, audio listeners. So yeah, I want to get your thoughts on that. So that's the show today. It's going to be a really good show. There's lots of stuff to talk about. You guys, I hope you have your picks of the week ready because I'm going to put you on the hot seat for your picks of the week. I have mine ready. And we're going to go through listener questions. If you have a question and you're in the chat, go ahead and post that. Chris Berry will collate those questions out for us and put them in the Google Doc, and I'll read them out to you guys when we get to the Q&A segment. But before we do that, I want to thank our friends over at Capture One, made by Phase One. They are the sponsors of this week's episode of This Week in Photo. You can get to their software at twip.pro/capture1. That's twip.pro/capture1. They've been all the rage on the TWiP Pro network and in all things TWiP lately. It's all lots of people are talking about Capture One and Capture One versus Lightroom and which is better, which is a better workflow. Turns out Capture One is a really good workflow, and in fact today I did an interview. One of those 5 interviews I did was with the CEO of Seraph, which is the company that makes Affinity Photo. And he had some interesting things to say about Capture One in regards to Affinity Photo. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming up in a couple of weeks here. We'll be pushing that thing live. So thank you guys for coming, or thanks Capture One for sponsoring the show. It is always a pleasure to have those guys on. Then at the end of this episode, when we finish all of our chit chat and chatter and talking about talent and getting to the bottom of that, I'll be running an interview that I did with Aaron Babinec. She's an adventure and wilderness photographer who I like to say, and I said in the interview, is the personification of Indiana Jones if India had a camera. That's her right there. Seriously, she's amazing. She was an educator. You'll find out all about Erin. She's an inspiration in many ways, and probably the most humble and talented person that you could ever meet, besides, Troy Miller and Thomas Hawk. So, yeah, no. So this is gonna be good. So guys, let's dive in. Before we start, I want to just do some quick sort of housekeeping. Thomas, I want to start with you. You and I haven't talked in, like I said, in a long time. The last time I had you on TWiP, you were working on this lifelong project of accumulating a certain number of images. And I want to find out, first of all, tell us what that number was and how close you are to it, and what was the gist of that journey you put yourself on.
Yeah. So one of my own goals is I want to publish 1 million photos before I die. Not just to take 1 million photos. I mean, I've already taken several million photos, but to process, finish, and have them be completed works of art. And so I've got about a little over 150,000 up now on Flickr is where I keep them. And I got probably another 160,000 or so that are finished and processed and ready to go to be uploaded. So I upload 50 a day or so to Flickr, and so I'm almost a third of the way there, and I've got I'm my life's half over, a little over half over, I guess, because I'm 51. So
hey, speak for yourself, man. Speak for yourself.
Hey, well, if I make it to, I'm going for 100. So if I go to 100, I should be able to get 1 million photos in. I think I'll do it.
Yeah.
So that's my goal, and predominantly shooting America. So, I'm shooting the 100 largest American cities, and then the 200 largest, 300 largest American cities, rural America, festivals, portraits, people, nature, landscapes, just everything America, all 50 states, So, I've got about probably maybe 60% of the states done at this point, and 60% of the 100 largest American cities done. And I'm just little by little. On Friday, I'm flying to Nashville, and then I'm driving to Knoxville, and I'm shooting the Smoky Mountains and down to Atlanta and flying home. And so I just, pick off a little piece here and there all the time. But it's going great. It's everyday photo thing.
That is really cool. It is your life, the personification of a self project right there. Yeah. I mean, that's a lifelong project, not just I'm going to do a photo every now and then. You're like, that's a lot of photos over a lifetime. You're building basically a Thomas Hawk stock library over there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I want to shoot America more comprehensively than it's ever been photographed in history.
Good.
So that's kind of the goal over my life, and to capture a piece of that and archive it and put it on the web for the world to see as long as the web is around.
I love that. Yeah, and in the next lifetime, you could do it again and sort of show the progression of everything.
Right.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, man. Welcome. I'm excited to hear your opinions on this. I know you always have opinions on stuff, as is Troy Miller. So this is going to get good. I know. I have a feeling. Troy Miller, you're on the show. For the people who may not know who you are, you're also known as Spicy Jello, spicyjello.com. What's your elevator pitch? What's your cocktail party spiel that you tell people when you meet them?
I like to tell people I'm a creative. I make my living as a wedding photographer, but I'm into all things creative, whatever that is. Like, I'm into pottery. I do steel fabrication. Photography is my core. I mean, that's where I'm at. So, but anything creative. I mean, the idea that Thomas is doing this big project, I mean, to me, that's the essence of being a creative. That's awesome.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is I did an interesting interview. Thomas, I think do you know Julianne Cost over at Adobe?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I did an interview with her a couple weeks ago, and it was all about projects, personal projects, and the importance of personal projects, and giving yourself a box or sort of boundaries time-wise to play in to kind of push your creativity forward. Really interesting stuff. That's a smart person over there they got working at Adobe.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah, they
Yeah.
got good people there. Good people at Adobe.
Yeah. So, folks in the chat, again, I want to remind you guys, if you want to get your questions into us, go ahead and put them in there. As Chris just mentioned in the chat, mentioned This Week in Photo. It'll highlight your question to us so you can find it easier. And we'll get to that in the Q&A segment. Also, if you're enjoying this episode and you dig it, give us a thumbs up in there so that the Google robots will know that we're worth streaming, and they'll keep us in their good graces, and maybe the algorithm will bubble us up to so one or two people can see our show. So if you got to go over there and play some some offerings at Google in order for that to happen. But guys, let's start with the topic, or this first topic I want to talk about, and that's talent. And that's the idea of, it's very simple. The premise is very simple of this question. Is talent learnable? Troy Miller, I'm going to start with you. You're in the middle here. I'm going to start with you. So it's our Brady Bunch. Wait, you're over there. There's, I don't want to lead the witness, but there's two schools of thought. There's the school of thought of either you're born with it or go do something else. Do what you're great at. And don't try to force yourself into doing stuff you're not great at. And then the other school of thought is, if you put 10,000 hours into anything, you can become great at it. It's all about mileage and repetition. And that's how you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice. Where do you fall on that? Is it nature versus nurture, or is it, something else?
I tend to think that there's talent in all of us, but what that talent is specifically is different. I couldn't learn the talent to be a musician. Like, I could be a musician, I could certainly learn that, but do I have the talent that it takes to rise above mediocrity, or to be better than the next person who just goes and learns the steps? I'm a very visual person, and so for me, my creative elements are always visual, and I think my talents are visual, and that's where I could do painting, I can do sculpting and building, and photography is where that's at. And then that talent, I think, is enhanced by the skill of learning over time. I don't think that you just naturally are born with it. There are some people who have talent right out of the box. I mean, Mozart, composing his first symphony at 6. I mean, there's definitely some innate talent there, but not everybody can learn that.
Yeah.
So I think talent is specific to each person. Like, it's a gift. Right? Like, every person has that little gift, and you just have to nurture it and figure it out over time. That 10,000 hour thing, I think that what that does is that helps to fortify where that talent is.
Yeah. A lot of this conversation came from a chat I had with Abarian X Perillo yesterday. So I drew the analogy of the Venn diagram of, 3 circles that intersect. One of the circles being talent, one of the circles being desire, let's call it. You want to be a photographer. Maybe you suck, but you want to be a photographer, and you like everything that goes along with it, but you don't have that innate talent. And then the third one could be, it could be a lot of things, but the third one could be money, and just sort of what can keep you going on this as a career, and which one is the right one to do. Thomas, I want to throw the question at you. The same question I gave to Troy, nature versus nurture. Can people learn to be great or exceptional, or do they hit a ceiling based on, whatever genetic factors that they're saddled with?
So I think, yes, I think absolutely everybody can learn to be an artist. Everybody can learn to be a creative individual. In fact, and I think in all of us is the seed for that. And, there's the whole left brain, right brain thing, and some people use, one more than the other, but I think everybody has creative potential, and developing that is really up to the individual. And sometimes it does take a lot of practice, the 10,000 hour things, or, Cartier-Bresson said, your first 10,000 photos are your worst.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be developed. I sincerely believe it can be developed, and particularly with photography specifically. I think anybody can develop talent.
Can you develop to great though? Right? I mean, you can develop. Is there a ceiling? Can you develop to competent, or can you develop to excellent
You
and
you can
and
develop.
amazing?
I think an amazing. I
You
believe
can.
because here's what I believe though. My beliefs might be a little bit different off this, but I believe that the only person you need to be great for or that judges you as a master is yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so can you be great? Yes, but what is great? What is greatness? By whose standard, right?
Well, I mean, by George Washington on the dollar bill standard, right? Because you want to be great and then be compensated for that greatness if you're trying to make a business out of this. I mean, you could take that. I don't care what anybody else says. This is all about me perspective. If there's no money involved in it, right?
Well, right, but I believe creative pursuit, while it can involve money, it sometimes,
Yeah.
that at its core it does not. And I think that if you're going to judge it by, well, how does society respond to it? How does money respond to it? How do fame and recognition respond to all of that? I mean, look at Vincent van Gogh. I mean, the guy basically was never appreciated during his lifetime. He committed suicide when he was 37. He did, 2,000 works of art. He cut off his ear and gave it to a prostitute. I mean, he was just, it never regarded. Now he's just one of the greatest painters of all time.
Yeah.
But during his lifetime, he was not considered in any way great, and he didn't make any money, and he didn't, So I mean, what is greatness? I mean, so for me, I think each individual has to look at their own work, and to them that can be great. And maybe one person's work is they want to do great figure study and models, and that's what they focus on. And somebody else likes to photograph cars, or someone else is a landscape photographer, or everybody does their own thing. Or in my case, I want to take 10,000 photos of neon signs. But whether that's great or not, sometimes it will be recognized by others, and that can include commercial success, but many times not.
Yeah.
And I think that you should pursue it, and I still think that you are absolutely great to the extent that you appreciate your work, you take pride in your work, you develop your work, you improve your work, and it's great.
Yeah, no, I agree. Troy, I want to have you chime in on this as well. So, Trevor Pinocchi in the chat room put a statement in there I want to highlight. He says, competence can be taught. I agree with that. Competence can be taught, but part of being a photographer, of course, genre notwithstanding, is confidence as well. So you could book learn and understand how to shoot, let's say, models or weddings, right? And the mechanics and the flow of 1,000 weddings and get it. But until a Troy Miller gets in there and takes command of that wedding, and is that taking the command of that wedding? Can that part be taught? Can the competence and the confidence be taught? Troy Miller, what do you think?
I agree with everything Thomas is saying. And I think that in the sense of, when we look at doing things for ourselves and being satisfied in our work, and that's what's really important first. We need to be satisfied in our work first. Then when we take it out there into the world is going to judge it and just break it down. It's going to put it in categories and enter competitions. And then, do we get compensated or not? It takes a lot of work to get there. You've got to put in your 10,000 hours, even more than that. I mean, I've been shooting weddings for going on 30 years now, and there are photographers that just don't see the day the same way I do, or see a sunset as it's happening in the same way that I do.
Yeah.
We could say, I think it's fair to say that that's talent, right? Like that's one of those things that I just see light differently than the next person, and maybe that helps me sell weddings. But certainly, however we slice it, what really it comes down to is you have to work really hard at it. It's not, you can't just sit on your laurels and go, well, I've taken a few photos in my time, so I'm pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
You got to work at it, and then every day. And I'm sure Thomas can answer this too. But your first 100,000 images, you're like, well, that was pretty good. And then you do your next 100,000 images, and you look back and go like, what was I thinking? Like I could have done that sunset so much better if I would have just understood.
Yeah.
So there is talent and skill and learning and time that all comes together to sort of, in my opinion, make that creative moment work.
Hawk, do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that I put a tweet out the other day that I said, the most important characteristic for a photographer is endurance.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it takes time and time and time. And that one of the problems for a lot of photographers is I think they give up too early, or they don't put in the work and they don't do the work. And I think it's just, you got to be out there with the camera, even when you don't feel like being out there with the camera or whatever you're doing, and just continue to go at it and go at it and go at it. So yeah, I do agree. I think that you do develop talent over time. But a part of it is you can't just say, okay, I'm going to take 100 photos and I'm done.
Yeah. All right.
Right.
Well,
Well,
here's a. Oh, go ahead, Troy.
I was going to say, well, look at Ansel Adams, look at Moonrise over Hernandez, or look at his famous El Capitan shot. El Capitan. He shot thousands and tens of thousands of plates of film before, like the Moonrise over Hernandez, before he saw that moment and knew that that was the shot he had to get. Yes, he was a talented man, and yes, he had a lot of skill. But it took years of practice for him to be able to create that image. That was by no means just this innate, hey, I'm good, I can make good images, right? He was prepared. His car was prepared. His camera was ready. There's a lot that went into that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a, we're looking at it, I think, in one dimension, and that's the, can you practice and get better? And I think the consensus is yes, you can get better, you can get great, like Thomas says. But here's a wrinkle in that. I'm going to throw in a bone into the gearworks. We'll see how you guys deal with this one. Thomas, you go first on this one. So if you overlay the technology quotient onto getting good, is technology and how things are getting, I mean, it's hard to take a bad picture with today's cameras, right? Or let me rephrase that. It's hard to take a badly exposed photo with today's cameras. You can take one of your foot that's perfectly exposed, right? It's not making a good photo. But it's hard. The cameras are doing a lot of the work for us. And if you fast forward into smartphone technology and computational photography with bokeh and post shot bokeh and all that stuff, it gets even more blurred, right? So is technology sort of short-circuiting the path to greatness, because no longer do people need to suffer and make 10 bazillion mistakes on shutter speed before they understand how shutter speed works? What do you think?
Because I believe that a vision is so much more than the technology and the tools that you use to complete the vision. And in looking at that as an artistic vision, and just to look at an example, for instance, you can take and say, Ansel Adams makes these great photographs, right? Everybody would agree they're classics, and that was time and time and time and practice again. And maybe you can point an iPhone at El Capitan now and get an interesting looking photo that looks pretty well composed. But at the same time, it's what are you doing with your entire body of work as a photographer? So to me, photography these days is less and less about one image, making a nice photo of a flower. And it's more, what are you doing with your body of work? And so, and I think that that's where the creativity comes in. It's not just, okay, I'm making one creative image. It's, I'm going in this direction. And it doesn't, oftentimes it's not even technology enhanced or based. I mean, I've seen a lot of people do very creative stuff with Polaroids, and you have people like Nick Leonard running around taking pictures of neon signs with Polaroids that look outstanding in this sort of very lo-fi aesthetic that are not necessarily perfect photographs. And I actually like a lot of that stuff in some ways better. So I don't think that the tools. I think everybody has a vision, and sometimes that vision is creating this epic masterpiece of a waterfall that you're using every tool in Lightroom and Photoshop to perfect, and other times it's just running around with a film camera and slinging it over your shoulder and snap, and then seeing what comes up.
Yeah, and and there's something to be said about that as well. Troy Miller, what do you think about the gear, the technology sort of short-circuiting the path to greatness in terms of learning how to do photography?
I think it's doing two things, and I spend a lot of time with new photographers and photographers that are trying to grow and build their business and build their career and build their art. And the one thing that I've come across is one, the technology really opens the floodgates for some people. It absolutely just opens up their creative ideas for them to be able to go do things. But what I see is that for a majority of people, technology is getting in their way. And what I mean by that is it's not really the cameras, but it's the computer, and it's uploading, and it's backing up the data, and how to get it into get it into Lightroom or get it into Capture One, and then what are your output preferences and what presets do you use, and you're spending so much time on that I have friends and colleagues that literally struggle with the after the button pushing part. So it's a different challenge, and I see it as more of a majority. A lot of people have a lot of creative ideas, but I think they're having a hard time getting them out. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe the technology isn't really in the way. Maybe it's just distracting them, or they get caught up in too many of the things. So in one sense, I think it's really opened the door for some people to for me, example, being able to shoot infrared. Just pull up a camera and shoot infrared is just amazing. That's technology I never had before.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have to be respectful or cautious of the technology and try not to get oversaturated in it, and try to get it out of our way, because it's in the way a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a skill, learning how to not be seduced by the siren song of the next cool thing, right? But at the same time, I mean, you don't want to be seduced by the siren song, but at the same time, you don't want to be a Luddite and blind to progress, right? So
yeah, you don't want to be left behind either.
No. So
it's like Affinity Photo. You're like, man, this is really good. I got to go look at that. And you just spend an hour playing with it, and you could have been outside shooting some photo. You could have been creative.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Well, then here's a different spin on this, Thomas Hawk. Mediocrity, right? Yeah. So, you look online today, there's a lot of amazing photos, but then if you look online enough, you start seeing patterns in the chaos and a lot of repeated shots, right? And you're the perfect person to ask this, because you've shot so many photos in such a diverse range of photos. How do you avoid, or how do people that are out there, as they're on their journey to gain talent, how do they avoid mediocrity and sliding into that, I'm going to just shoot what everyone else shot, or I'm shooting for the likes or the thumbs up? How do you differentiate yourself and not be oatmeal?
Right. Yeah, I think you have to be thoughtful, and you have to think about what is your artistic vision, what is your project, what are you really doing, what do you love doing, and there's different types of photography. I mean, you go on Flickr sometimes, and somebody goes down and the fireworks show is on, and they take 3,000 photos of the fireworks show, and they're badly composed and they look terrible, and they just throw them all up on Flickr, 3,000 in a row.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. But I think that if you are a serious photographer and you're thoughtful about what you're doing, and you're a careful editor of your images, I really don't believe in a mediocre photograph. And I don't believe, and part of that is, back to who's to say what's great, who's to say what's mediocre?
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly enough, back to our old friend Ansel Adams, one of my personal inspirations is William Eggleston, who's really by many regarded as really the father of color fine art photography, and has been shown, obviously at major museums all over the world. But, when he had his very first show at MoMA, Ansel Adams wrote sort of a scathing letter to John Sarkowski, saying, how dare you put this man's work in the MoMA in New York City, the great MoMA. And it was kind of their first big color show. And it wasn't just that William Eggleston was shooting color, and that was a big shock to the world that was so used to the aesthetic that Ansel Adams had created with black and white, but it was that he was shooting banality. William Eggleston will just take a camera out and he'll shoot, a car bumper, or his freezer at his house, and his refrigerator, or a pair of shoes under a bed, and these are a light bulb on the ceiling. And it's just, people are like, well, what in the world is that all about? And why should that be a great photograph? But now the widely regarded is these are brilliant, great photographs. So what is a mediocre photograph, and who do you listen to? And if the great Ansel Adams says this is mediocre photography, do you listen to him or do you not listen to him? Right. So I think mediocre I think it all comes down to individual. I don't think a mediocre photograph exists inside any one individual's mind. It's just at whatever state they are. Now I can look back, at my photos that, like Troy said, and say, okay, geez, those first 100,000, I can't believe I took that photo. That's so terrible. And that's, to me personally, but I believe, if you take a photo and you care about it and you create it, it's a great photo.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole thing is subjective, right? Art in general. Absolutely. It's 100% subjective. So who's to say the shot I did of my hangnail is not art? It's art, and it may be art. It may be art.
It's definitely not.
It probably is.
See, thank you. All right, here's another take on this, and this might be slightly controversial, as you know. You guys know I can be sometimes, but let's overlay age into this learning matrix, this 10,000 hours thing. A lot of people say, okay, you're like Thomas, you're 51. I'm your age. I think we're all generally in the same age. If like for people that are in our age range, is it too late to learn a new skill? Right? If someone picks up a camera today and they've never shot photos and they decide, you know what, I want to be the next Ansel Adams, and they're 55, 60 or whatever. Is it too late for them? Is it in photography or music, or can they go be a DJ? I'm talking about myself here. Can
they get a motorcycle?
Can they go get a motorcycle, or is that a midlife crisis? I don't know. What do you think, Thomas?
Absolutely. They can buy a guitar. You can start doing painting, and look, you have George Bush doing paintings, right? Starting to decide his second life as a painter after being a president.
Yeah.
I believe that anybody at any age is no constraint. Age is no constraint to being creative. Everybody is creative at every age, and you can develop that creativity. And especially in some ways, photography might even be a little bit easier because you have a little bit of a head start, in that you're not developing some of the. I do think that the road to being, say, a great a pianist and learning how to play piano might be a little bit harder than what the ramp up speed to start making interesting photographs.
Yeah, this is because physical, right? Hitting those keys at lightning speed is more difficult, right?
Right, it is. So I do think I would encourage anybody at any age to take up photography and to use the left side of your brain and to be creative and to do something. And I don't care if you're 9 or 90. I think it's at any age, everybody should pick up a camera or somehow express yourself creatively. It doesn't have to be a camera. You could buy a guitar when you're 70. All you need to do is learn 3 chords and you can play something in the key of G. So
I agree with you, but I know Troy Miller, on the other hand, thinks life past, say, 30, the ship has sailed, right?
That is not true.
So what do you think, Troy, on the age thing? Is age a barrier to picking up new skills, specifically photography?
No, not specifically photography. There are certainly some skills that age is gonna play a part in. You want to go out and be a race car driver and compete with the 25s, like you're not going to be able to do that. Reaction skills and things like that.
Right.
But in the sense of what we're talking about, photography, art, no, there's no barrier. Age is never a barrier. There's literally no barriers to being a creative or being an artist. There's just none. Whether it's disabilities or it's challenges of any kind, financial or otherwise, there is always an opportunity to be creative and go create art.
I love that. Yeah. So don't use it as an excuse, people out there. Hey, in my younger days, I would have done this, but now that I'm 30, I can't do it right now. I don't want to hear it. Right. All right, let's bring this topic home. The last part of this is there's when you talk to people about how to learn different things in photography, a lot of people say fake it till you make it. Right? Pick someone. You want to be a wedding photographer? Model Troy Miller. You want to be a travel photographer? Model Thomas Hawk and do what he did. Buy his gear. Buy the same shoes and T-shirts he wears, and until you can sort of define what your style looks like. Thomas Hawk, what do you think? Is that a viable path to fake it till you make it, or should people start at the outset trying to figure out who they are and what their own personal style is?
I think that develops over time, a personal style. I mean, and you may initially be attracted to a certain style of photography. You may say, "Oh, look at this HDR stuff that Trey Ratcliffe is doing. That's really interesting," and try to do that. And then you may find a year goes by and you're a street photographer and you're doing, modeling after Gary Winogrand and shooting out on the street and doing stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think you can certainly be inspired by people. And you can, to a certain degree, say, oh, I think that subject matter is interesting. Obviously, there are certain genres, whether it's landscape photography or nature photography or portraits or whatever. But I think everybody ultimately, if you do it long enough, you'll develop your own style and you'll develop your own interest and direction. And I'm more of a generalist. I shoot everything, but there are some people that gravitate towards one specific avenue, and I think that's fine too. And I think everybody finds their own way, and you find your own path. Sometimes I think you want to step back a little bit and say, am I letting this other photography influence me too much?
Uh-oh. Thomas froze for a second.
Creative goals.
There you go. Thomas, you're freezing a little bit. Uh-oh. We'll see if we can get Thomas back. Troy, you still there?
I'm here.
All right, good. We'll see if we can't get Thomas back. At least he's frozen with a pleasing expression on his face there.
That's always good.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get him back. So while we're trying to get him back, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, the whole fake it till you make it idea, is that a viable course of action to getting good at photography?
Sometimes. I would say that if you're a landscape photographer or you're going to do macro or something like that, yeah, you can kind of do that. If you're going to be a wedding photographer, I'm gonna suggest no, because if you don't really have the skills to pull the day off, how can you fake it, right?
Yeah.
So you have to work through the challenges, whatever those challenges are, and you have to throw yourself out there. One of the things that happens with people early on in their photography is that they don't spend enough time with their cameras. They don't know their cameras really well, understand the exposure triangles really well. But because they look at the back of their cameras and go, oh, look, I took a really cool sunset shot, they think they've made it. Mm-hmm. The difference between skill and luck is that you can get that image over and over and over and over. And somebody may look at that and go, wow, you're really talented. Well, no, that was my 10,000 hours I practiced.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good point, though. I mean, that's a huge point right there. Just the idea of it depends. Faking it till you make it depends on what you're doing and who you're doing it for. For example, I can fake it till I make it learning how to, take on a different genre of photography with self projects like HDR or something, right? Or astrophotography, whatever. But I shouldn't be doing that if there's a client on the other end that's waiting on my stuff, right? I shouldn't be learning on their dime. I don't want my my general practitioner at the hospital faking it till he makes it, right?
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we've all had to do that. We've all been in a scenario where we're like, I'm not sure I can pull this off. And we just go all in and we do what we can to make it work. And then the next one, we gain some more skill from that. So yeah, you could say that that's kind of faking it, but in reality, it's you weren't as confident with yourself as maybe you should have been.
Yeah.
But practice, that old adage, practice makes perfect. I mean, you have to put in the time for anything. You just lots of time.
I know. Yeah. I'm still practicing this whole podcasting YouTube thing. One day I'll get the hang of this thing.
Yeah.
Still trying to get, speaking of that, still trying to get Thomas back. I'll try to call him back and see if he can't get him reconnected. But let's end that segment, the whole talent nature versus nurture thing. And I want to move on to the picks of the week. So the picks of the week is a segment on This Week in Photo where our guests get to share something that to the This Week in Photo audience that is somehow related to photography. It could be anything. It could be a course. It could be a technique. It could be a mindset. It could be a lens or whatever. Troy Miller, I'm going to let you go first because the hawk is missing in action. What's your pick of the week, man?
I've got two. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I've got two. I just upgraded my webcam to the Panasonic or the Lumix G7, and I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with that camera. All the settings and all the features that are in that little thing. It just really impressed me for what it was. I mean, my assumption of what, a $500 camera could do really was blown out of the water. So that was very cool. But when it comes to software, I've been looking at Photo Mechanic by Camera Bits. It's upgraded to the next version, and I wasn't really super excited about it, but it's so fast, and I've been using it for about 10 years now. If you want the fastest browser and for image calling and stuff, Photo Mechanic is definitely my pick. So
yeah, good picks. Hey, I got an update while you were talking. I got an update from Thomas Hawk. He says Comcast went down at his house.
Oh no! Oh my God!
Did I not tell you, Troy Miller, about the gremlins that show up whenever I do these shows? They swarm. These gremlins swarm whenever we do an episode of TWiP. You just got to get through them. You got to power through.
Nice.
So we may have lost Thomas Hawk for the rest of the show, but he did share a lot of valuable tips, and I got to get that guy on for a one-on-one interview as well. And but we'll make that happen. My pick of the week is and which I mentioned earlier is Affinity Photo. So I want to give you guys a glimpse. I didn't know this. I have Affinity Photo on my iPad. I have it on my MacBook. And I hadn't really dove into it. I've been trying to force myself to learn it, but I keep finding myself bouncing back to Photoshop because I know it and I've been using it for, since the beginning of time, right? So, so I was speaking with the CEO, the guy in charge of Affinity Photo. So I had him on the hot seat and I asked him a bunch of questions. That interview will run in a couple of weeks, but I asked him, one of the questions I asked him was, why would people consider Affinity Photo over Photoshop when there is that muscle memory built in? And he answered that, with aplomb. But the main thing that I took away from that interview was I didn't know that all of the Affinity applications, they have 3 right now, I believe. They have Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Publisher. And all 3 have the same file format. And so you can just open files between them with reckless abandon. Even on the mobile devices, it's the same file format, so you can pop around. The other thing was the way that they approach smart objects in Affinity products is, kind of in Photoshop, you have, it's kind of a deliberate act to make a smart object and then embed that or place that in your document so that it's resolution independent. You can make changes and it won't degrade. They built that in. So you don't even know that it's doing that. So it's
right.
Like smart object and editing in place is part of the app. Like in Photoshop, when you run a Gaussian blur, it brings up the dialog box and you drag and you see what your Gaussian blur is going to be. Then you say, okay, then it does it. In Affinity, you're doing it in situ in your document. So you say, I want to blur this thing. You blur it. It blurs right in place versus you having to go to another document. Or another window. So that's my pick of the week. Affinity Photo. During that interview, I pressed and tried to get them to offer us a discount for TWiP, but they wouldn't do it. So he said it's already too inexpensive. So yeah, I would suggest go check it out. It's really, really cool app. So that's our picks of the week. I feel like I want to do a pick of the week for Hawk. I'm going to do a pick of the week for Thomas Hawk. He had on his Smug Mug shirt, so his pick of the week is Smug Mug. Go check out Smug Mug. That's Thomas Hawk's pick of the weck. You ready to do the listener questions? You want to dive into those?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. We got a couple of them in here. Thanks to Christopher Berry. The first one is from Steve Van Sickle. Steve says, do you think the tech internet does more to scare away potential creatives? For example, is it too daunting to see so many amazing artists that seem to have already perfected their craft? That's a really good question. Is it too late, Troy Miller, to, or is the wall of amazingness that is Instagram and all these other services where you just see these flawless images, does that scare people away from the party, thinking, hey, I can never be like that?
I think that seeing that does scare people away, because what they're doing is like I put in the chat, like you're looking at your daily shoots, your daily shots, and you go to Instagram and you're looking at like somebody's best and you're like, oh, I'm not any good. I shoot I've got 1 million files in my catalog, but I post one at a time and they're good, right? Mm-hmm. The other 300 from the wedding are mediocre. So what I would say is, yeah, don't look. Just don't look. Shut yourself off from all that media. Don't go look, and just focus on your own work.
Yeah.
And just build it and show it to the people around you, show it to the natives that are in your life, to people in your tribe.
But it's hard to say that. I mean, it's easy to say that, but then on the other hand, we're contradicting ourselves because we're like, shadow someone that you like, fake it till you make it. And then on the other hand, we say, go your own way.
But you got to get to a point where you can walk and run before you can run a marathon, or before you can start timing yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So photography is like that. Like you have to learn the camera, be able to do your basic exposures, learn composition, and then show those to the people around you before you go out in the world and compete. Because really, that's what we're doing in social media, is we're competing. Mm-hmm. We're putting our images on. We're looking for likes. We're trying to, compare to somebody else. I'm trying to get you to look at my fire images. It's a competition. It's like going to a job interview every time. Yeah. You got to work your way up to that. You can't just throw yourself in completely, new. You're just going to get shredded, and then it just ruins your motivation.
Yeah. Nope. I agree. Very good. Very good. All right. Next question up is from Chris Berry. Chris says, has there been a time when you knew you've overworked a skill and forgotten to incorporate the talent that led you to improve your art, be it photography, talent, or another art discipline that you've transmuted into your discipline? How do you get back to that later at a point of mastery if you still find value in it? That's a deep question, Chris. Chris Berry. Chris Berry, what is going on over there in Arizona? Is that a... No, that's okay. Let me see if I can interpret that. Okay, has there been a time when you knew you've overworked a skill and forgotten to incorporate the talent that led you to improve your art? So overworked a skill, maybe done something too much. Like, I don't know. How do you overwork a skill? I mean, if we're saying that it takes repetition, do it more, 10,000 hours, how do you get to Carnegie Hall to make that skill and become the best of the best? I don't think there's a such thing as overworking a skill. What do you think?
I think that it becomes mundane sometimes. If you do the same shots, you do the same poses, or you do the same lighting over and over and over, you're not rediscovering it. So maybe that's it. Maybe it just becomes mundane and you don't appreciate it anymore. So you don't build on it. Mm-hmm. It seems like oftentimes when I learn something new, I go out and I build on it. I'm excited about it. If I shoot at the same location all the time, I tend to find myself going to the same corner where I know the light's good. Mm-hmm. If I'm at a facility I've never shot before, I'm like scouting everywhere like crazy. So I have to constantly force myself.
What do you do to make sure that you're at the top of your game when you go to a wedding? Because it's like I can count the number of weddings I've shot in my lifetime on one hand, maybe two hands. And you've shot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, right? Just by shooting those few, I realized that I didn't really want to be a wedding photographer, and I have immense respect for people that do shoot weddings now. But I wonder at the beginning of the wedding, like the night before, when you're driving to the location, is there a ritual that you have to go through to make sure that you are hyped up? I mean, is it caffeine? Is it no-dos? Is it like, do you run around and do jumping jacks? How do you get yourself hyped up so that you could be that photographer?
I eat. I just make sure they got a full belly before I start the day. Then I'm not.
Oh, see, that would put me to sleep.
No. No, literally. I mean, I've been doing it a long time, and I've had burnout, and I have gotten bored with myself, and I have gotten to a point where I'm not happy with what I'm creating, even though I'm creating something really good. I just don't like it anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's a conscious effort to put it through. And some people are entrepreneurs. Some people are self-starters. They like to get up in the morning and go to work. Other people like to have a cubicle and have a job, a list of things to do. When I get to a wedding or a shoot, I consciously say, you know what? I know that spot over there under the tree's good. I'm going to go walk over in the parking lot and just see what's going on. Yeah. I constantly have to mentally break my habits.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm looking at the chat here, and it's really interesting what people in the chat are saying, because they're like, like Chris is saying, you get to the point where you're a robot. WorkPick says, I think it's a question of getting bored and becoming burnt out. And I agree that Trevor says he's burned out on Instagram. So how do you avoid that, right? And again, I always go back to the thinking of like the kid that's trying to learn violin. You got to do the scales over and over and over. You got to keep doing it. Then at some point, you hit that tipping point where you click, and now you're a virtuoso, right? How do you get past that the Pet Cemetery thicket to get to the other side where you're actually amazing and you're a virtuoso. I don't know.
It's awareness.
Yeah.
I really do. I really think it's awareness. I mean, look, Frederick, we'll take you, for example. You reinvent yourself all the time, right? Not because you have to, but because you want to, because you're constantly like, ooh, well, I can do this and this works really good. So I'm going to try this now. Like, oh, we got this whole recording thing down. Let's do it live. What could go wrong?
Exactly.
I
don't know if that's smart or just ignorance.
I think it is smart. I think that's what breaks the mediocrity that we tend to find ourselves in. I believe that mediocrity is the foundation for greatness. And if you find yourself constantly doing the same thing over and over and over, we'll call that mediocrity. If I'm always doing portraits and I'm always grabbing a 70 to 200 to shoot portraits, well, that's going to become mediocre over time, right? So now let's grab the 105 macro. Let's shoot with an 85-1.4. Let's use a fisheye. Let's figure out how to make that work.
Yeah.
And then when I go back to the 70 to 200, it's not mediocre anymore. It's just part of the variety. It's part of the menu now.
Yeah, and that's what gets people excited about this stuff is the variety, right? I mean, depending on your genre, like in like Tim Ingalls in the chat, he'll tell you that part of his love of photography is the gear lust, of course, and the nerd quotient of, just the technology piece of it. And then there's the psychology piece in model photography, building the rapport with the other human so that you can collaborate and make a great image, right? And then it just goes on. And all these different facets come together to keep us excited and to keep it fresh. Let's take a couple more questions here, and then we'll close the show and roll the interview with Aaron Babinec. I know you guys want to hear that. Let's see. Next one. Ruth Happel made a comment. She says, maybe you can overwork a skill with the pressure of social media to keep posting a similar style or genre for being rewarded. You lose the element of being experimental. Yeah, that's that. The Scooby Stack syndrome. You want the Scooby snack of the likes and the thumbs up and all that stuff. So you change your direction to get more of that sort of digital endorphin rush. So yeah, that's definitely a good comment. Ruth also says, is it better to specialize and become an expert on one type of photography, or let synergy propel your favorite genre by dabbling in other phototypes? That's a good question.
I like the idea of being well versed and going deep in a single subject, because then I think when I move peripherally, it helps me understand the relationship to that initial subject. So if I'm really, really good at weddings and I go out and I shoot landscapes, and all my landscapes look like I have people in them because I'm shooting shallow depth of field and I'm focusing 1/3 of the way into the scene, and now I've got a way to compare, and now I know what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
As opposed to just kind of learning everything and then hoping you fall on something. Really focus on one thing and learn it really well, and then I think those skills will translate.
Yep, I agree. Very cool. All right, next, this is a comment for you, Troy. It says, this is from WorkPics. Which lens did you choose for the web for that G7 over there? What lens are we looking at you through?
It's the 14 to 42, and I'm pretty sure I'm right at 14. It's the pretty much the widest.
Nice.
So.
How do you like the lens? How do you like the glass on that micro 4/3 camera?
I haven't taken any photos with it.
Yeah.
But I actually recommended this camera to a friend of mine who has a daughter who wants to get into photography. And I said, this is like the perfect intro camera. It's super lightweight. It's very functional. Does a lot of amazing things. And I'm amazed at some of the features that are in this camera. I got to tell you, it's a little embarrassing that I got, multi-$1,000 cameras that didn't do some of the little goodies this thing does. So
yeah. Well, I'm not going to get into that debate with
you
right now.
Hey, but it's understanding, right? Like you understand how it works, and that helps you just get the gear that works.
Absolutely. Okay, a couple more here, and then we'll move on to the interview. Carlos Rivera says, has anyone used On1 Photo Raw, and how does it compare to Affinity? Have you used On1 Photo Raw?
Yeah, I have. It's more of a comparison to like Lightroom and
digital asset management type apps, right?
Yeah. It's nice. It's really nice. So there's a lot out there. I mean, because there's also Alien Skin, which is really nice. There's Luminar. So it's in that family.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many choices out there. And that was one of the questions I threw at the affinity guy this morning was, why enter such a crowded field? This is like a party where you're trying to find a date and there's like, a gazillion other people there that are competing for a finite number of people that want their attention. Like, how do you deal with that? So yeah, he had a great answer to that as well. The short of his answer was, you got to be better than everybody else, essentially. So, which is a good answer. Good answer.
Yep.
Or at least attempt it. Trevor says, do you think you have to work harder when you're talented, to push yourself harder to discover your own limits, to go beyond what's easy for you? Yeah. I'll hit that as well. I think so. Like when you're, not to say that I'm talented, but I think when you have an aptitude for something, you can push yourself to a certain level. Whereas other people that don't necessarily have an aptitude have to work twice as hard to get to that level, which makes you, when they work twice as hard and they're at your level and you're sitting there eating a bag of chips, you want to push really, really hard. So like, okay, come catch me now. Right. So absolutely.
I think it's just all about understanding your limits, knowing where your limits are. I mean, it not to sound conceited in any way, but I'm good at shooting weddings. Like I can shoot weddings. They don't scare me. They're easy. I see the day all the way through beginning to end. The thing that I have to be really careful of is not being complacent, not being someone who goes and I'll just go do that shot and okay, yeah, another silhouette, like no big deal. Like, man, if I do that, I'm dead in 3 years.
Yeah.
Somebody else is going to come up and just eat my lunch. So I've got to constantly be aware when I look at my work. Like, okay, I that's a good creative shot. At least I tried.
Yeah.
You've got to constantly push. Yep.
Keep pushing. Yeah. Don't rest on your laurels. All right. We're going to transition out of this segment of the show, Troy Miller, and go into the recorded segment I did with Aaron Babinec. Any parting shots you want to leave for the audience on either, talent and nature versus nurture, or, any of the other things that we talked about tonight?
I think there was a lot of great advice from Thomas and from the whole group of us here tonight. I think basically just go out and create, go out and work, shoot, share, ignore social media a little bit. Don't take that stuff seriously. Really don't, because I can tell you that what is popular in social media isn't what I sell and isn't what makes my living. So there is a difference there. But get around a good group of people. Find a tribe of people that you're comfortable with and spend time with them.
Love it. All right, folks, that's the end of This Week in Photo. Troy Miller didn't mention it, but you can connect with him at spicyjello.com. That's where all of his work, or a lot of his work, is, and you can harass him over there. But we're gonna end this episode of This Week in Photo and go on to the segment with the interview with Aaron Babinec. If you are listening to this episode audio, this will end right now. And if you want to listen to the Aaron Babinec interview, that should be in your feed also separately. So making it easy for everyone. You can get it however you want it. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot, Troy Miller. I appreciate your time tonight, man.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Happy to be here.
All right, folks. And I want to quickly thank our sponsor once again. That's our folks over at Capture One, made by Phase One. You can go ahead and download their software at TWiP.pro/Capture1, TWiP.pro/Capture1. They are a fantastic digital asset manager, post-processing, raw processing application. And we love them because they are helping us keep the lights on over here at This Week in Photo. And now it is time for our interview with Aaron Babinec. We talked about adventure and wilderness photography. You guys are going to love this interview. It was fantastic. Take it away, Aaron. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. I have Aaron Babinec on the show. Aaron and I met at a trade show, Photo Plus Expo, several months ago, and I've been begging her to come on This Week in Photo since then. I finally, through no help from the universe, I finally got her on the show. And we are going to be talking about, like I said, adventure, wilderness photography. We're going to be talking about her workshops. We're going to be talking about all kinds of cool stuff. But this is the first time Aaron has been on This Week in Photo, so I want to dive in and kind of do the origin story of Aaron Babinec and what makes her tick. Why is she a photographer versus a painter or a sculptor or something like that? We're going to dive into all that stuff, and then we're going to talk about these awesome workshops that she's doing. So, Aaron, welcome to This Week in Photo. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's really, really a pleasure to be here at long last, Frederick.
I know. We've been trying to make this happen. I was telling you as we were dialoguing back and forth in email, every now and then, I do a lot of interviews, but every now and then there's these gremlins that show up that are like, this is not going to happen. They either scheduling gremlins or Skype gremlins or something shows up,
Yeah, they were definitely conspiring against us for a while there. We beat them.
Yeah, we beat them. We had technical gremlins and force of nature gremlins. Let's just say that were stopping us from doing this show. But let's dive in. So tell me about Aaron. Tell me about the stuff that what makes you tick. How did you get started in the creative world? I know I'm fairly certain you didn't start in photography. You started somewhere else, and then you landed here. How did that go?
I transitioned out of a former career as an art historian. So I had to do some photography for that in order to develop an archive of photos for teaching and research. I was out in Europe and the Middle East for a long while, photographing archaeological sites and artifacts that were of interest to me, things that I needed when I was working on my dissertation and when I was teaching later. And it was a very slippery slope. I just really, really enjoyed the process of being out with the camera. And having also had a background in backpacking and a lot of just being very outdoorsy in general, it was just a matter of time before I finally admitted to myself that I really kind of enjoyed the photography, probably more than anything else that I was doing.
Yeah.
And and I also realized at some point that everything that I enjoyed about my career as an art historian would transfer over almost perfectly to photography as well. I didn't have to give up anything: the teaching, the lecturing, the being creative, which you are as an historian. Getting to go to exotic places, doing a lot of travel, the research, everything. Because I'm also a writer. It all just ported right over.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that, because I'm always curious about that career field, art history, art historian. What does that mean when someone says I'm an art historian? What exactly does that mean? What's a day in the life of an art historian?
Well, my specialty was ancient art. So I not only spent most of the academic year, the semesters when the university, I was at UC Berkeley when the university was actually in session. My job was basically to teach the undergrads and also do my own research and writing. And so that meant lecturing and grading papers, which is one thing I'm very happy not to have to do. That's the one thing that I lost that I do not miss. But then also during the summers, because I was a classicist specializing in the ancient world, I was also de facto archaeologist. And that required me to spend lots of time getting really dirty, getting up really early, kind of all the stuff that I'm still doing.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time excavating in Israel. And so those two things were kind of how I used up a lot of my time. In the summers, being out in the field, excavating, photographing, also going to museums. That was part of my job, part of my research. And then all the other stuff that you do in a classroom, which I don't miss so much, except for I enjoy the lecturing and I enjoy being with students, and I still do those things. But spending lots of time in dusty old underground libraries, not so much.
You know what? I'm getting a feeling here that you're Indiana Jones. Come on. Have giant boulders been chasing you around? And that is fantastic. You're the Indiana Jones of photography. That is That is fantastic. So you are you hold we kind of glossed over it, and I guess people could sort of discern it by the conversation that we're having. But you hold a PhD in art history, so you're Dr. Babinec, as we talk through this.
Almost. Yeah. Actually, I was ABD, all but dissertation, and I had 3 chapters of my dissertation done and all the funding I needed to finish the last 2 that were required of me. And that was when things really came to a head. People were knocking on my door for things I wasn't even offering as a photographer. And I had to make a really, really tough decision whether or not I felt it was necessary to finish the PhD. I was already teaching and all of that before then. I just needed to finish the book. But it would have meant going 100% full-time on that. And I felt like the iron was hot and it was time to strike with the photography. And after much, much soul searching, I realized that I wasn't going to lose anything by making the transition over to being a full-time photographer. And in fact, I would just gain everything that I was missing in life. And I was right. I feel like that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made.
I love that. Yeah, follow your heart. Follow your heart and do what you love, and the rest will follow. Right. I want to. While I have you on the hot seat, this is one of the few times, if not the only time, that I've had someone on the show that has a formal art background, and you're a painter transitioned into the world of photography. And I know very little about how to be a painter, that world. So these, bear with me, these questions are coming from a position of ignorance, right? So when I think of painting, and I think of the old masters and the new masters, people that are making work today, I think of the artist having control over every stroke. Everything is intentional, for the most part. You have control over the light. Everything in that image you have 100% control over. Whereas if you translate or transition into photography, that's not necessarily the case. You have control over a lot of aspects of the image, but not every aspect of the image. What was the main thing that was the hardest thing to sort of overcome when you made the jump from a traditional painting sort of creative outlet to pixels and screens and cameras and megapixels and all that stuff?
That's a good question, but I would have to kind of flesh that out a little more by emphasizing that although I was a painter, I was also a graphic designer. I worked professionally at that to help put myself through my undergraduate education and my first couple of years of my master's degree. So I have that background, as well as my specialty. My dissertation was on sculpture, Greek sculpture specifically. So I have this sort of overview of media that goes way beyond painting, and I was bringing all of that to my photography. So, for example, when I go out, I'm photographing landscapes, which is what I do. I see trees and mountains as abstract sculptures in a landscape. I see them, all of that is ingrained in me from my experience of looking at sculpture and studying the composition of sculpture and that sort of thing. What I brought from the painting over to my photography is really what I do in post-processing. So, for example, one of my most recent, most popular articles is on color theory for landscape photographers, which is essentially about color grading and finessing tones and hues in an image the way that a painter would. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of that in my processing. So yeah, it's really kind of a mixture of all those things. I think that the biggest challenges for me at first were the same ones that a lot of people deal with when they get into photography. Having to learn a lot about light, but I did also, because I was photographing in museums, create my own light, and I was way into strobist stuff. Mm-hmm. And I did some product photography. I shot models for a while. I did all kinds of stuff that taught me a lot about light. But I think those sorts of challenges, learning about light, and for sure learning how to compose by finding things. That is something that is probably the sticking point for most photographers, especially landscape photographers, because you are having to sort of go out there and organize the world, just basically using your choice of where you put your feet and what lenses you're using and framing and whatnot. And so that is quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I like to. When I talk to landscape photographers, and I'm not a landscape photographer, but I enjoy, I'm looking at your website right now as we're talking, and the images are just, otherworldly for lack of another way to describe
it. That's a good thing.
They're beautiful. Yeah. Because this world, I don't know, other worlds are great. No, but your work is fantastic, and I always admire landscape photographers, people that are doing this genre of photography, because when I go out, I can't see what you see, right? I can't see that landscape that you see. Maybe I need to take one of your workshops, we're going to talk about in a second. But I can't see what you see. How do you, what are some tips for people that are watching this and they want to be, maybe not your level of landscape photographer, but they want to be competent in the genre? How do you get a different shot of, say, El Capitan in Yosemite here in California that hasn't been done before, right? Ooh. Or, what's
that's
the
a whole
secret?
Other issue. I tend to prefer areas where I can really hear myself think, and I don't feel as though the place is haunted by the footsteps of a million other photographers. So most of the images that you'll find on my website, those are all from locations that I discovered myself. I've been independently exploring areas of the Dolomites, Death Valley, and many other places for over a decade now, French Alps. So there are very few places that I tend to go where, they are those sort of iconic spots, just because that's not as much fun for me as places where I feel as though it's wide open and the challenge is there for me to figure it out. So there's that. Yeah. So, but when you are in a situation where you're in a place and it is very familiar and you want to try to do something that's your own. I think the best thing to always start out with is just to have some kind of response and to work from that. And in some places where a lot of people have been there and have already, then there aren't that many options. Well, then maybe you are going to come up with something that's kind of similar to what other people have done. In which case you can maybe just, process it better. That's really what it comes down to. But I prefer those spots where you can look at a place, have a response to it, ask yourself, what is it that I'm seeing here that I think is really important and special? What kind of story am I feeling here? And I've written a lot about all of that sort of thing. And then try to find a way to keep things out that don't contribute to that story and to keep things in that help to kind of emphasize it, basically.
Yeah. It's that sort of begs the question, is the work that you're doing, a lot of, what's a better way to frame this? A lot of photographers use photography as sort of therapy or catharsis in some way, as an outlet away from the stresses or stressors of their lives. Are you the same way? Like when you're out and about shooting, is it just like, I'd rather be no place else? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I believe that 100%. In fact, that's why I feel that teaching is an act of service in photography, because I'm helping people to have that outlet and helping them to find ways to express themselves, give them this kind of outlet that's not so defined and something that's more open-ended than what most people have on offer to them as ways to express themselves. Visual language is a different kind of opportunity to kind of work through and release and just have that catharsis and have fun and be a more relaxed, well-balanced, happy person.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what I teach.
Well, speaking of that, and sort of like I said, I'm slowly transitioning into these awesome workshops that you provide. I want to talk about the adventures that you've had. right? So you know,
Okay.
just from us speaking for what we've been talking for what 15 minutes already. So just from speaking from 15 minutes, you've been around the world. You're in Slovenia right now, you know, as we
Yeah.
record this. You're the soles of your feet don't cool off, right? So
Not really.
you're all
I'm on
over
the
the
road
place.
about 300 days a year. Yeah.
Wow, 300 days a year. So, okay. So, what, you know, we could obviously talk for hours about all that stuff, but give me some highlights, some adventures of some locations where you're like, you know, my life was changed when I went to X, Y, and Z because of, you know, whatever. Like, I'll speak to Martin Bailey and he'll say, "Yeah, I went to the snow monkeys have changed my life in Japan." You know, what is Aaron Babinec's snow monkey?
Well, my biggest story, and it's one that I've told a lot, but is probably my love affair with the Dolomites. I think that's what really formed me as a photographer. When I first started going out there, it was about a decade ago, before the era of social media, before there were many photographers doing more than the sort of the valley shots and a few very typical traditional shots. In fact, I remember being told once by an Italian that there's just certain ways that you do things. You go to these places and you shoot these things. But by that point, fortunately, I'd already been on the ground doing things my way for just because I didn't know what else to do. So I bought a bunch of maps, a bunch of topographical maps, and I just went out exploring. And I had a lot of adventures, got myself into all kind of trouble.
I want to hear about that trouble. What is that? What Indiana Jones, you know, sinking in quicksand trouble or what?
Yeah. I've had some kind of hairy kind of scrapes with danger, just climbing around places, having maps that are mismarked or out of date, and going places and getting myself caught like a cat in a tree up some trail where I really should have been equipped with climbing gear, and the map I had wasn't telling me that. So I've definitely had those sorts of situations. And for sure, being just out in all kinds of crazy weather and a lot of just feet on the ground, strenuous kind of stuff too, that just developed a lot of my sensibilities as an artist, and just also really just kept me really just enthusiastic because of the rewarding nature of finding things and feeling as though you're doing something that's never been done before quite.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
What's the one place that you'd like to go, like that you would go back to again and again? Like your number one place on the planet, your desert island place where, hey, someone said, "Hey, Aaron, you know, after this week, you can't travel again, and you're gonna have to drop anchor." And where would your drop anchor place be?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, of all the places that I have been, there would be one answer, I guess, and then the other answer is I'm craving. You mentioned the desert island. I'm actually craving some island time. I would love to get out into something tropical and work in an area like that. I don't know where, the Seychelles Islands or something.
There you go. Just
something
drop
really remote.
Drop you on some remote atoll somewhere, and with your camera and some solar powered battery chargers, you're good to go. So let's transition and talk about these workshops that you're doing. So the reason while you're traveling the planet and going to these exotic places is not, part of it, I would assume, is because you just want to go there, but you're also teaching people and using your education and background and those skills, those superpowers to help people see differently and understand photography in exotic places. Tell me about that and how that came about.
Yeah, quite accidentally. People started asking me if I taught workshops or if I would do private workshops before I ever was even offering them, or anything like that was listed on my website. And that was one of the last pushes that got me into going full time with my photography. Before, I was really just doing part-time work, assignment work, mostly is what I was doing. Completely different kind of photography. And I finally just, went in and did it because I really wanted to teach, and I really enjoyed doing it. So my workshops have evolved into a rolling creative laboratory in every case. Not only do I take people out outdoors, out in the field. I also run seminars in all of my workshops. So creativity seminars, composition seminars. I do one on the history of landscape photography. I have a post-processing seminars. So it's really a way for me to give people everything that I can to help them to progress on their own terms. So rather than me trying to make everybody in my own mold and just make little clones of me, I'm constantly looking for ways to enable people to sort of blossom as an artist on their own. And so far, it's working really well. And people are loving the seminars, and it's really exciting to see people just become extremely excited out in the field because of things that are in their head, from all that we've been talking about. I had a couple of students in one of my recent workshops. Two of them independently came up to me and said, "Wow, paradigm shift." They used exactly that term, and I thought that's awesome.
That is fantastic, and that
gave them a whole new way in.
Yeah, that's got to make you feel good as an educator, right? That's what you're looking for, is the paradigm shift. And like, I want to get you across this chasm and have the sun start shining. You understand this concept, and now it's simple, and you can go do stuff. Rather
than just saying, here's the shot, take that shot, which is more of the tour approach than the workshop approach.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I've seen workshops, I've been on workshops where it is that exactly. It's where put your feet here, set your camera at this f-stop, this ISO, and this shutter speed, aim in that direction, press the button.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we'll talk about how that happened versus the why we're doing that and that sort of thing. So tell me more about the workshop. So where are you? There's a list, obviously, of different workshops that you're holding, but where's the next one? How much does it cost? How many people do you allow on these workshops?
My workshops are relatively small. They range from about 8 to 12 participants each. My next one, I haven't listed it yet, but I'm going to be doing I'm bringing back my master class in Death Valley National Park. That'll be be listed soon. That'll be in the first week of December. But then I also have currently listed right now, I still have a couple spots left in my early July Dolomites session, my Adventure in the Dolomites workshop. I think that's how much? I never can remember what they cost because I have so many different ones.
It's on the website. We'll put it on the website.
Yeah, it's on the website. Yeah. I think it's about $4,000 for that. It's an all-inclusive workshop. And then I've got a whole bunch of exciting ones coming in 2020, and that list will go up at the end of this month too. And that includes my winter Dolomites, Iceland. I do an Icelandic Highlands trip, so taking monster trucks out into the Icelandic Highlands, where last time we didn't see a single paved road or another photographer for 9 days out there. So very remote, very peaceful, very inspiring.
I love this.
Yeah.
That is I love how calm and confident you are. You're like, and then we did this trip to, to the moon, and we hung out at a crater for a while. And, I'm thinking of going to Mars. I don't know about that.
I do tend to take people to places that most workshops will not go in a lot of cases. So I find a way to get them there. In my Winter Dolomites workshop, we're taking snowmobiles. In the Iceland Highlands, we're taking monster trucks, whatever.
That's
and
great.
in my summer Dolomites, we hike.
I love
we backpack out to refuge huts.
All right, I'm gonna have to scrape up some money and come on one of your workshops. It sounds awesome. So as we close this out, I want to see if I want to get some tips out of you, and mainly for the people that are listening to this. Many of the This Week in Photo audience are. Most of us are photographers, right? But a lot of the people that listen to the show are trapped in a cubicle. They're in their 9-to-5 tech job or medical job or whatever, and they're listening to us right now as they do their job, and they're like, man, I want to go on a snowmobile with Aaron, So what's the secret? I mean, you're a well-traveled person. What is the secret to to, other than, getting online, booking a ticket and booking a hotel? What's the secret to pushing yourself, to getting out there, to traveling and picking a location and going to that location to photograph, even if you're not going on a workshop? How do you make that leap? Because it's not, for most of the people that are listening, it's not money, because it's not that expensive to travel these days. Yeah. But what's the key? What's the secret?
I think that you have to, it is sort of an act of faith that, will I go out there and just waste my time? Because I think that's more so what people are giving you when they take your workshop, the most valuable thing they have to offer, and that's their time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that that holds people back sometimes, is, what am I going to get out of this? And, I could be, of all the things in the world I could be doing, mm-hmm. Why that? Why travel? And I feel as though it's something where you just have to say, if you feel as though you're here with your photography and you want to be here, mm-hmm. It helps not only to just sort of get out of your normal routine of doing things, but also your normal areas of doing things. And travel on a workshop enables you to do both of those things, provided that it's truly a workshop where you're learning new things, but also just getting yourself into a new location. Can really help bring on the inspiration and just kind of help you sort of rechannel and move forward.
Yeah, and how do you mitigate the fear of traveling? The fear of there's something bad happening. There's a lot of unrest in the world, right? And there's a lot of places where you probably shouldn't go these days, and some that you absolutely should go to. How do you sort of manage that part of it?
Well, that's also the beauty of the workshop. So you're traveling with people who are going to take care of you, basically.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm a certified wilderness first responder. I go way out of my way to make sure that everybody's very comfortable and well taken care of, and they don't have to worry about those things because I've already done the worrying for them. That
is fantastic. Yeah, that's I don't want to gloss over that too much, because that part is what, and I'm glad you said that. I was hoping you were going to say that. That's one of the key parts of why you would go on a workshop and pay that money. It's not just because, hey, I want to go hang out with Aaron Babinec. It's also, Aaron has created an atmosphere of safety. She's scouted the locations. You know where you're going to eat. You don't have to figure that out. One of the fears that a lot of people have, even in American cities, I think, just, it's like, I'm going to a new city, and there's certain areas that you shouldn't go into, and you don't know that you shouldn't go into them. You wander in there with $20,000 worth of camera gear, and the next day your life is different, right? So you do all that legwork, and it's just by the numbers, and you're the tour guide, basically, right?
Well, I actually don't identify as a tour guide. That's one thing I say I'm not, but I mean, in a way, I'm performing some of those functions, but I'm an educator above all. I run workshops, not tours.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I've got all that basic stuff covered. In addition, that I can really take care of people for my workshops abroad. All they have to do is show up at an airport. I pick them up there, or my transportation company does, and we drop them back off there. And everything in between is all taken care of. So they just have to concentrate on being inspired and having a good time.
I love it. And we can leave it right there. That is perfect. So all this information is at aaronbabinec.com, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So all roads lead to aaronbabinec.com. Obviously, in the blog post for this episode, I'll put all your information, and in the YouTube description, all that, etc., so people can find you very easily. But Aaron Babinec is Babnik, ERIN. If you're listening to this, write it down right now. ERINBABNIK.com, and you can check out all the stuff that we've been talking about. Aaron, this has been a pleasure speaking with you. I think it's well worth the wait.
Likewise, Frederick.
Yeah, well worth the wait to get this recorded. And I'm humbled at the stuff that you have done and are doing, and your enthusiasm, and sort of the ethos of how you're trying to not, like you say, be a tour guide and not just run another, rubber stamped workshop, rather you're educating people and creating those epiphany moments. I think that's important.
Exactly.
And it's you're filling a missing area in photography. Everybody and their mama has a workshop these days, right? But
Right.
very few people have real experiences like you're building. So congratulations on that.
Well, thanks so much, Frederick. Really appreciate you saying that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Thanks a lot, Aaron Babinec, and we'll see you on TWiP. I'm going to invite you, and I said this off the air, I want to officially invite you while we're recording this to come on This Week in Photo as one of our guests when we do our roundtable sort of shows. I'd love to have your voice in the chorus there as we discuss the news of the week, if you're up for it.
Well, then I officially accept.
There you go, right there. All right, we're engaged. Cool. All right, Aaron Babinec, thank you so much.
It's fun, Frederick.
Okay, take care. This is TWiP.